Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this little foray is entitled Pilots Pushing for Robot Airlines. Now you might say, that's ridiculous. It's not the pilots, it's the engineers, it's the CEO that want to take pilots out. And I go, no. The worst enemy for pilots staying in the cockpit is the pilots themselves. We got rid of the three-man crew on the 737. There was a time when you needed three people in the cockpit on the DC-8s, on the 727s. The systems were complex. Just running the electrical system took a person. But those days, with the improvements of technology, have gone by. They held on for the third man on the 737 for a while, and I talk about those issues of three going to two-man crew, two-person crew, and now we're talking about going to a single pilot operation, but it's all headed towards no pilots in the cockpit, and from what I'm seeing, it's the pilots themselves that are their own worst enemy. Now, someday, are we going to have this guy here? The flight attendants come up and say, well, we're ready to go, Captain, Sir, anthropomorphically correct being up there, and they will function as the pilot in command. And of course, you know what this guy is doing here. He's looking at the whiskey compass and he's going, let's see, acceleration north, deceleration south. So, he's getting ready to fly there. Now you may say, oh, this is just a pipe dream. Pilots, automatically control of aircraft is just a toy. And of course, with the drones out there, there are some very effective toys that are become very effective. And of course, there's a history of self-driving vehicles. Now, cars, it's much more difficult to make a self-driving car. I think we can all see that because we don't have to worry about when they're flying about pedestrians walking out in front of us or other little significant things that can happen. But let me go back here in a little bit of history. All right, so Ernest Gann is one of the most prolific and one of my favorite aviation authors. And I'm going to read something to you here from The Flying Circus, Chapter 5. It's titled Old Number One. Now he's talking about a very senior pilot, but he's talking about now in the 30s. And he says, we are now in our third generation of pilots, a vocation or avocation pursued by so many human beings of every conceivable description that the multitude is often more depressing than inspiring. These individuals are presumably capable of controlling machines skillfully enough to cause it to become airborne, then proceed to a previously intended destination and land without serious damage to machine or occupants. In the United States, a 2¼ by 5 3/8 inch piece of government issue paper which pilots are supposed to carry on their person infers, but does not guarantee, they can accomplish such an endeavor. It is officially called an airman's certificate, which is all too frequently a semantical rape of at least one innocent noun. I love this author. There are airmen and there are pilots. The first being part bird, whose view from aloft is normal and comfortable, a creature whose brain and muscles frequently originate movements which suggest flight. And then there are pilots who, regardless of their airborne time remain earth-loving bipeds forever. When these latter unfortunates, because of one urge or another, actually make an ascension, they neither anticipate nor relish the event, and they drive their machines with the same graceless labor they inflict upon the family vehicle. All right. He doesn't have a lot to say for people who really don't like to fly airplanes. Now, back in the time, that Boeing 247 was in the era he's talking about, and I had the privilege, thanks to Boeing Aircraft Company, the old Boeing, who was a great company back then. I actually got a chance to fly for several hours in the Boeing 247. Actually, the one pictured there, it's now in the Seattle Museum of Flight. It's permanently grounded, but at the time it was flying, and also that 777 there, which was in the flight test program. So I've flown these actual depicted airplanes, and I was told at one time by Boeing that I am the only non-Boeing test pilot who has flown both of these aircraft. So that's kind of cool. And here is a picture of the inside. That's me on the right in the what you would normally call the co-pilot seat. Actually, I talked to an old Boeing 247 captain, And he called this, they were called mates, not co-pilots. And on the left, you can see just the fantastic instrumentation, the nice old, that's a J8 attitude indicator they shared in the center there. And of course, some of the various instrumentation that they had there. Now, back in the day, okay, back in the day, now I'm not a Luddite or an old curmudgeon, but pilots flew airplanes. They didn't punch on the autopilot. You show me where the autopilot is on this aircraft. No, everything was hand flown. Okay, but okay, it's different back then. We didn't have reduced vertical separation. We didn't have a million aircraft in the air flying that you had to worry about hitting. You were kind of in a big sky situation there. You didn't have to worry about ATC saying, you're getting 100 feet off your altitude, stuff like that. So flying was easier because the precision wasn't necessarily acquired, which would require a lot of attention. Now, don't think that I don't like fun and fancy pieces of equipment. Okay, I got old. They retired me. I can't fly the 777 anymore, which I really love. But here is my Cessna Turbo 310R, and I've got all my fancy instrumentation. I really love it. But of course, I started out in the older aircraft, and this United 727, which is now in the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry, I have actually flown this actual airplane. All right, so here's that same 727, and I actually flew it a couple weeks before it was going to go into the museum, and I thought about making an announcement to the people that, hey, you're flying on a museum piece, or what's going to become a museum piece in just a couple of weeks, and I thought, nah, they may not appreciate that. But even back then, real pilots flew the 727, and we hand flew it a lot. We had to use the autopilot for the Cat 2 approaches, not Cat 1. Those could all be hand flown. People did it, and nobody got nervous. I actually heard, I got a lot of friends out there that are still flying, and I actually heard that one co-pilot actually tried to report a captain for hand flying a Cat 1 approach because he felt it was unsafe. Can you believe that? Okay, but back in, what is this world coming to? What is airline flying coming to? But back in the day, we flew the 27. But even then, when I was a co-pilot on it, I had this one captain. We were just doing a short leg, Chicago to Indianapolis. In the 727, that's a very short leg. You get minimal time even at cruise. I hand flew the entire flight, and I'm up at, I leveled off, and 28,000 feet, something like that. And he says, "Are you going to put the autopilot on?" I go, "No, I got trimmed up hand flying." And I did. I nicely trimmed up hand flying. I could see he was nervous. So even back then, it was kind of changing. But okay, let's talk about what the real problem is here. All right. I had a Canadian pilot when I got to do some flight tests on the regional CRJ-65 here. One of the Canadian pilots I was with said, the problem isn't that I'm a bad pilot. The problem is I don't have good instrumentation. And I saw exactly what he meant on this, because this aircraft has a heads-up display, and it's got these neat little concentric rings and vectors that tell you if you're accelerating, decelerating, and you can hand fly a Cat 3 approach to a landing and rollout. Now, I didn't do it in the actual airplane, but I did in the simulator. You have good enough instrumentation that you can hand fly this approach to Cat 3 minimums, and I landed, rolled out, stopped on the runway, and then they brought the viz up, and you're right there in the middle of the runway. Well, of course, the engineers, so they're partly to blame here, got away from that. Okay, so what we have now is you don't have good instrumentation, so you have to have the airplane land you in Cat 2 or Cat 3 weather, and I've done just a whole bunch of those landings, and the airplane does a great job. It takes a lot of work in flight tests to get everything to work out fine, and I could tell a few stories on that development, but the airplane does a very good job. So that's kind of part of the problem, is the airplane does a better job of flying than we do. And pilots, it's often said pilots don't monitor very well, but that's the position we're put into. We have to monitor the systems, and we have to watch the airplane fly. And for a lot of people, it's just so much easier to put the autopilot on. And I've noticed a tendency that back when I was a line check airman, I had a new group of co-pilots coming on board, and it was gear up and autopilot on. And it's like, no. The amount that they would end up hand flying was rotation to gear up and then click it off on final. And of course, since I was training them to fly the aircraft, I insisted we did a lot more hand flying than that. But here's where the problem is developing. We're becoming button pushers. And I would say to the crews, instead of saying fly safe, I'd say type safe, because a good pilot can type himself out of any bad situation. Okay, so we're getting into the situation where all we do is press buttons. Well, that can be done remotely as easily as it can be done in the cockpit. And they actually demonstrated that it could be done in the cockpit. So you got this little arm here. Now try to slap that away from the control panel if you don't like what it's putting in there. A machine, it's been demonstrated, can actually manipulate the controls to fly the aircraft. Now, what will happen here? Well, we start with an anthropomorphically correct pilot in the right seat and the captain in the left. Now, I all know you're saying, okay, this is AI generated, and you can tell it is because the captain's wearing the hat in the cockpit, and no pilot wears the hat in the cockpit. But let me digress here for a second. Early on, the pilots did wear their flight caps, the wheel caps like that in the cockpit. And it was speculated the reason they did it is because they were transitioning from like the Boeing 80, which was open cockpit. See, the pilots wanted to be out in the wind stream because you had to feel the wind. Okay, they didn't like this enclosed thing at all. So once they went enclosed, they still supposedly liked the feel of something on their head, like the leather helmets. So they started wearing these caps because it gave them the feeling until enough of those cycled through. But that's really a digression here. So we're back to the guy. Okay, can it come to this where you've got a single guy that's, flying the airplane, acceleration north, deceleration south? He's still trying to figure out the whiskey compass there. Nothing could go wrong. But we're in the situation now, and pilots have brought it where they've stopped flying the aircraft. They're just button pushers, and that can be replicated remotely. Or, if we truly go to it, it's going to be this guy. There's no cockpit at all. You just board the passengers. Now it'd have to be a larger vehicle, but you'd board the passengers. There is no cockpit. There is no windows. It's all done with sensors and cameras, if that at all. And it's all done remotely and electronically by data links. Worry about somebody hacking into that and controlling your flight. But this is what it could eventually go to. And the pilots are leading themselves down this line by becoming button pushers instead of still flying the aircraft. So that's my 2 cents worth that pilots are causing their own problem here. Hey, thanks for watching.